I try not to ever mention divorce unless the question comes up. Thing is, the only time that it has come up is from the kid who's got the spouse that the parents were worried about in the first place. Hi, Jeff Marsacci, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to this webinar for the estate planning source, which is also going to get over to the regular YouTube channel for the Plain English Attorney. We're going to be talking about in-law protection planning. All right, what exactly is in-law protection planning? Well, in short, it's making sure that your assets can go down to your children, but then they have to go down to the grandchildren and they can't go to a son-in-law or daughter-in-law. Well, wait a minute, doesn't a revocable living trust already do that? Well, wait a minute. It really does depend who passes on and in what order. And unfortunately, I see this a lot of times with attorneys. They're just not thinking of these different contingencies and what happens in their own mind. Even though it's their profession, they're thinking about it without these contingencies. I want everything to go to my children equally. Very common. But if one of my children passes on before I do, their share drops down to their kids. Well, what if your child didn't pass on before you did? Your assets went to them. And then they passed on, but they have a plan that leaves everything, including what you left them, over to their spouse. And what if that spouse then remarries and they have all of these assets and that new spouse has children of their own and they leave everything to their spouse? And now, where do you think your money is going? And I've actually heard this phrase: I do not want my assets to go to my daughter in law's next husband and his kids. I have heard that. That's what we're really trying to avoid here and what we can do successfully with in law protection planning. If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel. Now, what are the problems that we sometimes see with a son in law or a daughter in law? There are three main ones. The first, it's just not a stable marriage. There is a potential for divorce. They want to make sure they're avoiding the potential of the assets going down to their children, and then their children do something stupid with it, like commingle it. Now, I hear this from attorneys all the time. Oh, well, those inheritances don't become part of divorce. Well, they don't become part of a divorce if your kid doesn't do something stupid with it, like take the money and put it into a joint account. Or the most common thing: oh, honey, we've got all this money now from your parents. We can buy the dream house we've always been talking about. And so they get a realtor. They start looking around. Oh, we find the perfect house. Do we need financing? Oh, no, we're paying cash, the spouse says, as if it were their money. And then they buy the house and information goes to the closing attorney and they're like, oh, well, they're husband and wife. So this is going to be a deed with tenancy by the entirety. So the spouses get it joint with the right of survivorship. And then a couple of years later, the spouse is running around with a personal trainer or heading for divorce. I want half the house, but all that money came from my parents. Well, I talked with a divorce attorney and you commingled it. And you did. And so half the inheritance in that house, it's gone. It's going to be lost in a divorce. So they want to make sure that they are protecting these assets against a potential divorce. Second thing for the protecting the children: if they just see the spouse as a poor influence on spending habits, so they're spending money like crazy. For every dollar your child earns, that spouse is spending too. That money's going to be wasted. It's not going to end up being there to make life and retirement easier for your children, and certainly not going to be there for education for the grandkids, because the spouse wants the expensive sports car, the trips around the world, and the things like that. And They'll happily use your money to do that, and that's not where you want it to go. So there's just spendthrift issues. And the other thing, the third one, unfortunately, I saw a lot of this after the lockdowns and COVID. Their son in law or daughter in law is just a horrible human being. And the idea that they could be spending any of their money on anything, they just don't want that. Okay. So this is where the in-law protection planning comes in. Right. So yeah, I actually did have several clients within about a 2-month period after the COVID lockdowns ended where they came in, we need to talk about the plan. This is what's going on. This is what's happening. Well, we have that set up. Now, from my office, I call it the Trust Plus plan. All right, it's a Trust Plus plan, but really it's the in-law protection planning. So what we're doing, we have a setup. There is still the revocable living trust. The revocable living trust is the cornerstone of a solid, successful plan to avoid probate. But now, instead of the assets from a revocable living trust going to the children directly or holding it inside the revocable trust for the lifetime of the children, each child has their own asset management trust. So these asset management trusts are set up to receive the money. And now the asset management trust will hold that inheritance in trust in the discretion of the trustee for the remainder of that child's lifetime. So now, the way the asset management trust works, it's going to be in place so the trustee can give them bits of money here and there for things. Oh, we want to take a vacation. We want a couple of extra $1,000 to make sure we're doing it right. And oh, okay, sure, no problem. Hey, we've got the kids have, money's a little tight. We've had some repairs around the house and soccer camps coming up for 2 of the kids. It's going to be a week-long thing. It's kind of expensive. Okay, fine, here you go. What it's not going to do is, yeah, we want $700,000 to buy this dream house. Well, no, the asset management trust isn't going to distribute the money to buy the $700,000 house. The trust, the asset management trust, is going to buy that house and keep it as an asset of the asset management trust. So this way, if there is a divorce, they can still get the dream house. If there's a divorce, that spouse is not going to get anything out of the asset management trust because of the divorce. The child never owned it. It was always protected within the trust along with everything else. And so the asset management trusts are also set up so that after the child passes on, it has to go down to their descendants. It can't be directed to go over to the surviving spouse. So now the grandkids do get it. And you can put in appropriate age limits and things like that. So the asset management trust is going to protect it for your child's lifetime, make sure it goes down to those grandkids. And also, you can put in the contingency, well, what if there are no grandchildren from that child, or something happened, there was a tragedy, and they're passed on? It can go to the other children or children's asset management trusts, so it stays within your family, within your bloodline, and it's not going out to an in-law. So anything that's going from the revocable trust drops down into those asset management trusts. So let's talk a little bit about, well, why can't you just do all of that inside the revocable living trust? It just ends up creating too many complications. And believe me, this may sound like, oh, it's not going to happen that way. People can't be that ridiculous. People can't be that stupid. Well, look, I think it was George Carlin who said, think of how stupid the average person is and realize half of the people on the planet are more stupid than they are. All right. Well, he got 10,000. I want 10,000. Well, he needed $10,000 to put a roof on, to repair the roof on the house. You want $10,000 to take a 2-week trip to Cancun and just blow the money. We don't want to give it. Well, this is our trust. You have to give it to me. No. If you divide it at the point of passing on from the revocable trust into each of their separate asset management trusts, it's it's divided, and each child has their own trust. And believe me, in their mind, it's going to be, yes, this is my trust. That's their trust. So you do want to have separate asset management trusts for one for each child. All right. So, uh, what about retirement accounts? Well, this is also part of the strategy when we set things up, because the way it works, and if there are any accountants who want to correct me, or if there are any updates that I'm not aware of, if any retirement accounts pay into the revocable trust, then it's got at best, a 5-year payout, and the taxes get spread out evenly over a 5-year period. So yeah, we can do the accounting, do what the 1099s or K1s. Again, the accountants can correct me on whatever it is. And the share of taxes is paid by each beneficiary, and then it goes down to the kids through their asset management trusts. Well, okay, depending on the size of the overall retirement accounts, that's fine. But if we also instead, if it's a significant amount and you want to stretch it out over the maximum 10-year period for a child, don't leave it to them directly, because then it's not protected. Each child also gets an IRA trust. So now when the assets from the retirement accounts drop into the IRA trusts, the trustee is in charge. They can make sure the distributions come out of the inherited IRA, paying into the IRA trust. And the accountants can do their tax magic and make sure that the taxes get paid. But now it's paid over a 10-year period, not a 5-year period, which can reduce the taxes and the tax rates. And the money can now be reinvested in other taxable accounts inside that IRA trust. Now, is that meant to go forever? Well, it is, except I put in some specific language that you can have the IRA trust, after it's done its thing for 10 years, tax wise, it can move it over to that child's particular asset management trust so it gets combined. The benefit of that, it's still protected. It's trust to trust transfers, but now suddenly it's not having to have a separate 1041 filed each year for each IRA trust. It's just going to be in the asset management trust moving forward. And again, for the lifetime of your child, it's protected. What's it protected against? Well, again, the big one is divorce. You don't want it to end up being lost into divorce. You don't want a son-in-law or daughter-in-law to have any kind of claim on it. It's also immune from lawsuits. If there's any kind of disability that pops up and now suddenly they're receiving benefits, well, all right, these assets don't count. And that includes long-term care for an individual. And if Medicaid is needed, well, the assets in that trust, it's all in the discretion of the trustee to take care of the beneficiary. They don't have to spend that money on those type of healthcare things that the government programs would otherwise be handling. And so now it's protected. Again, protected to make sure it can pay for the extras that Medicaid and other programs won't pay or take care of. And at the same time, it's preserving it so it goes down to the grandkids or to the rest of the family after they have passed on. All right, so that's the setup. What about trustees, and what are some of the trustee issues that we've seen? Well, we can, and this might be a little more in a gray area. Apparently, siblings fight enough that they're not prohibited, and they're not prohibited from being the trustee for each other's trust, but that could just cause more issues. Sometimes it's just naming the people that you would have trusted to handle the revocable living trust to be the successor trustees. So I always look for at least three deep. In this case, we're talking about for the rest of each child's lifetime, and it could be, it could be three, four, five children. You're wanting to make sure that you've got a list of trustees. Sometimes we will go as many as we can. If we can get five in order, and now we're tapping into younger nieces and nephews somewhere in that list so that they're handling this for, at that point, what would be their cousins or friends of the family or even children of friends of the family that you know and trust and who would be looking out for your children. But here's the thing, almost universally, you're always going to want a trust company at the end of that line because it could just get to be too much. Relationships aren't what they used to be. They may not be what you have when you're setting everything up. They just need to be able to resign and pass it off to a trust company. So we always look to have a trust company at the end of the successor trustee list across the board for the asset management trusts and for the IRA trusts. And as long as we're doing that, we might as well also put that into the revocable living trust. So again, that's the setup. The trustees, typically they're remaining consistent. If you are having the children, it's usually their trustees for each other, and they are never trustees of their own trust. And that kind of destroys the whole making sure that it's protected from lawsuits and whatnot. If a child has full discretion over distributions and they are both the trustee and the beneficiary, you're not going to end up with any kind of asset protection against lawsuits or anything else. So that's what we're talking about with trustees. So, how do you fund all of this? Now, I'm going to use a case that I just recently worked on. We set this up probably about 4 years ago. My clients came to me. They had a significant amount of accumulated wealth, um, and he had gotten a bad diagnosis. He was fighting it, but we wanted to make sure. And also, the kids were a little young, and one of them wasn't in a relationship that they necessarily approved of. And it's like, look, let's just take care of this. Let's make sure that it's protected just in case. All right, so we set up the revocable living trust for them. 3 kids, each one with their own asset management trust, 3 IRA trusts. So, how did the funding go? Any bank accounts were owned by the trust. Stocks, bonds, and mutual funds owned by the trust. Vehicles, other types of assets like that, titled in the name of the trust. Life insurance named the revocable trust as the pay on death beneficiary. This way, if it goes into the trust and if something happened to both the parents, it would filter down to the asset management trusts. IRAs and 401ks, the spouses had each other as the primary beneficiary, but then for the contingent beneficiary, we had listed the IRA trusts equally. So that was the setup. Well, we got news early this year. He did, in fact, pass on. And so their investments were growing and continued to grow. And now suddenly we have a tax problem. Um, I'm not an accountant. I have my own opinions on things, but I was not about to give tax advice. And rather than set up and take advantage of the credit shelter trust provisions between the A and the B, and this was probably, I believe, at the point where he had passed on and we would be making the divisions, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 8.5 million, but projecting. She has a long, healthy life ahead of her. we probably would have been better off setting up that credit shelter trust and funding it with half the assets so that the growth would also not be subject to estate taxes. But the accountant instead did portability. So now, talking with the financial advisor, looking at the projections, looking at the growth, the fact that she's not going crazy spending money. She's set. She has her own work that she does because she enjoys it, and so her usual expenses are okay. The kids, yeah, there's some. The kids are still needing a little bit of financial help, but they're getting older. All right, they're not going to need that much. The assets are going to far outgrow it. So what ended up working out with a financial advisor, we're setting up an islet and funding a big life insurance policy on her so that if things do grow and we end up in an area for taxes, at least that life insurance policy can help pay those taxes without having to contribute to the problem by just having the life insurance in her name. So that islet got funded. So now with that islet, the beneficiary for the islet is the kids' three asset management trusts. So now that money would pay into the asset management trusts, and the asset management trusts can work with the revocable trust to assist and make sure that any kind of taxes and other things are paid prior to the revocable trust distributing those assets out to the asset management trusts. So it's all coordinated. It's all designed to make sure everything gets down to those asset management trusts. So, yeah, the life insurance in this case on her is inside an islet, and the islet is naming those asset management trusts as the beneficiary. All right, so now what do we do to explain all of this to the kids? Because I do not call this in law protection planning right to the kids' faces because they're the ones in the relationship. If you've got three kids, they're all in relationships or they're all married, a little of each. They know if it's called in law planning that one of those three spouses is not somebody who's favored and they're doing this just because of them. All right. So when you're having this discussion with the clients, you're telling them this is more about asset protection, generational planning, making sure that the assets are protected throughout the lifetimes of the beneficiaries, of the kids, so that if there's lawsuits, if there's any kind of disability, if for whatever reason there's long-term care needed, Medicaid is there, these assets won't count. It's something that's there, that's protected, that's their base, so that even if something happens on their end, not enough money for retirement, some kind of tragedy, it doesn't matter. It's going to be protected, and it's also going to be there to make sure that it gets down to the kids. Because of course, the sons-in-law, the daughters-in-law, they're going to want their in-laws' money to get down to their kids. And that's the way this is set up and it's designed to. I try not to ever mention divorce unless the question comes up. Thing is, the only time that it has come up is from the kid who's got the spouse that the parents were worried about in the first place. And that's why we have this whole thing set up. So this is how we set up that in-law protection planning. Now, I do have other resources on the web if you want to look at more on the client end for the estate planning source for anyone else. There's inlawplanningwebinar.com. And then there's inlawplanning.com, where I actually have the paid course, which hopefully in the next year or so, we're looking to update that with some better graphics and better recording, but all the principles are still there. So I hope you found that information useful. As I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And if you are part of the estate planning source, we're going to switch over to a Q&A session live. Thank you.